welcome back to another tutorial. Thought I'd do something different, set up the cameras and stuff, but yeah, today we're going to be doing this clip. So for this clip you're going to need three things, well two, but I use three. So you need HitFilm Pro. This can also be done in After Effects or something, but I prefer to use HitFilm for my asset creation. And then you'll need the Video Copilot Sabre plugin, which we'll be using in HitFilm. And then you'll also need DaVinci. DaVinci Resolve's fine, but DaVinci Resolve Studio, which is the version I have, much better, better for compositing. If you don't have Resolve Studio, I would recommend just doing this all in HitFilm or After Effects or whatever you prefer to use. Like I said, I've got it, so I'm going to use it. Same techniques can be applied to either one. Alright, so first thing we're going to want to do is track both of the eyes and set those to new point layers. The reason you want to do this is so that you don't have to manually keyframe positions and you can just attach everything to these point layers later on, as you'll see. Next thing you want to do is add a new black plane, set the scale to around 120%. I put it at this. This is just to account for the motion of the tracking. Now use the Sabre effect. I use the default setting Fire. This gave me closest to the look that I was going for straight off the bat, and that's always what you want to do. You want to save as much work as possible. So yeah, I used Fire. Now adjust the start and end positions, with the start being attached to the person's eye and the end being where you want the laser to be hitting. Now the good thing about having the eye tracked is you can just parent the whole black plane layer to your left eye point, and this will save you the trouble of having to manually keyframe the Sabre position, like I said. What you do next is you set the color to a more reddish sort of orange. I like the orange look because it is a little bit more realistic rather than just pure red, but the effect is red at the end of the day, so you can go for realism, but you have to mix it with the stylization, especially when you're imitating effects like this. Once you've done that, go to the distortion settings and adjust the wind angle to suit your footage, and then up the wind speed. Now I did mine at a speed of about 50 because that's what worked for my footage. If your footage is a bit different or you like it to be faster or slower, that's all your preference, but 50 is what worked for me. You can then adjust the distortion amount to suit your footage. I didn't touch it much, but it can work. Now you want to make sure you up the end size so that it gives the laser a bit of perspective and it's not just a straight line all the way through. You want it to feel a bit 3D. That's the first one done. So duplicate that layer, move it to position on the other eye, and then set it to the other eye track. Now this is the last step in these two beams, is you want to add an angle blur, and this kind of just helps sell the motion. You don't necessarily need it, but I found it helped. So this next step is to kind of add a little bit of randomness and depth to the laser. You're going to want to duplicate it again, but this time set the default to tractor beam. It's going to look a bit funky first off, but if you change the color to red, it'll already blend in. Now once you've done that, all you need to do is up the wind speed to about 50, like I did with the other clips, because if you adjust the wind angle, it'll change the distortion and stuff. We don't want that. Just changing the wind speed works fine. Next, you can play with the distortion amount to suit your footage. Again, I didn't really do this much, but it can help. It does add a little bit. Okay, and if you've set everything to the point layers, then congratulations, you've done the beam. Awesome. Now we can move on to the next section. Now this next part did take quite a while, but I think I've got to a point where it's quick and kind of easy. So just a warning, this next section does have a lot of roto work. First thing you're going to want to do is to make an orangey red sort of plane and set it to add. Now you want to mask around one of the eyes and then parent the layer to the eye track. So now that your orange plane is tracked, we can scrub through the timeline and adjust the mask as we see fit. If the person's eye changes or they blink or something like that, you can roto that, but do remember that a laser is coming out of their eye. So if they blink, I would say just move past it so that you don't get a weird like stopping and starting sort of thing. But yeah, that's how we do it. Now you want to roto all the way through until the end of the track, and then adjust the opacity of the plane to match when they are opening their eyes. Now what this is meant to be is kind of the build up. It's the energy building up inside the face, in the eyes, and then eventually bursting out. So you want to adjust the opacity to start before the laser comes out so that you get that kind of sort of build up, you know, that makes sense? What I also did was I upped the contrast in the layer just so it looked like it was really bright, because Outside of bloom and lens flares and stuff like that, the brighter something is, the more contrast it actually has. Doing this kind of helps sell that effect, even though it is under flares and stuff and you don't really see it in the end. That added intensity really helps it. Duplicate that layer, parent it to the other eye track, and then replace the roto work you did with the other eye. Now that your eyes are done, you can feather them both out to however you see fit, and then we'll go on to the next section. Okay, so this is going to be the exact same process. You want to roto around the eye socket instead of the eyeball this time. And again, make sure it is parented to the point layers that you have, so it'll make it much easier for your roto work. You want to feather it a bunch to make it really blend in, because you want this to look more like a subsurface sort of glow. You don't want it to look like their face is actually glowing. You want it to look like the muscles are glowing. And repeat the process for the other eye, make sure it's parented to the other eye, and you should be all good for now. Next, what I did was I duplicated the original footage and went through and manually rotoed all the edges of the face, the sections where it will not be as see-through, for example, the nose cartilage. And I did this to kind of sell the effect that it's not just glowing, it's kind of underneath something, you know, there's things in the way. Once I did that, I put a fill color effect on that layer and set it to black, so that when we export it for DaVinci's compositing, that we can set it to screen and it will still keep all those features that we rotoed. Now that we're done with that section, we can move on to the next one. Next are the flares. This is by far the easiest part of this tutorial. All you need is a black plane, set it to about 120% scale again, and you want to use the light flares effect. Now, I went for digital blocks. You don't have to use this one. This is just kind of what I thought fit the most, but I am pretty biased to it as it's one of my favorite flares effect. I use it in a lot of stuff. So if you think there's something better or you just have another personal favorite, go ahead and use that. At the end of the day, it just needs to be a light flare of some sort. The good thing about the light flare effect is you can actually parent the position of the flare to another layer. So if you parent that to the point layer, you won't need to worry about parenting the actual layer itself. So go ahead and do that. Next, I adjusted the intensity and keyframed it to kind of match the beam actually coming out of the person's eyes. I went through and adjusted the length and width of the rays. Then finally, I added a flicker effect, and I left the settings as default because I like the way the default one looks. It's very random, it looks natural, it's just a good effect. An optional step, which I did take, was to put a hue colorize effect on it and match the color red, reddy orange sort of thing that we're going for. You don't have to do this. To me, it felt more realistic. A lot of the effects that use like heat vision and laser beams and stuff like that have like a blue flare. You repeat it for the other eye and then you're done. Like I said, easiest part of the tutorial. So you want to export everything individually as PNG sequences. So in the end, you should be left with the beam, the eye glow, the flares, and your final footage. So we bring it into DaVinci, and I'm not going to go over the whole process, but I'm just going to show you what I ended up with. So I have a lot of color correction nodes, just adjusting the color to fit exactly how I wanted. I didn't want the beam to be pure white in the middle. I gave it more of like an orangey sort of look to make it feel as hot as possible and kind of like hollow, because at the end of the day, it is just a light blast. It's not anything physical. So, you know, I decided to give it less of an intense white to kind of sell that effect a bit more. I also adjusted the opacity of the flares a bit because they were a bit distracting, but that was just in the merge node. And then finally, I topped it off with some grain to kind of tie it all together. And then I added some camera shake, which really helped sell the effect once I keyframed it in. I did add a few final touches on the color tab though, so I'll just show you what they are now. First thing I did was add a little bit of a glow to kind of make it seem like it was a bit more intense of a beam. It wasn't just like sitting there. Then I added some lens reflections to really help it feel like it's part of the scene. Some lens distortion to kind of get that anamorphic look. The lens distortion really isn't that necessary. I went over this in my Demogorgon tutorial. It's just something I like to do. It adds a little bit of a flair to it, and you know, at the end of the day, you can barely notice, so why not? And then finally, I added a vignette, very subtle vignette, just to help it all kind of narrow the focus onto the beam and the character. I didn't do any color grading outside of that. I just did the trick that I talked about in my Demogorgon tutorial, where you set the thing to RGB color managed, and that converts the raw footage automatically to Rec 709. I definitely could have done a bit of grading if it was in like a short film or an actual scene. I definitely would have, But for this thing, I was just showing you the effect, so I didn't think it was necessary. After a bit of sound design, you should have this. Thank you guys for joining in. I hope you followed along, I hope you enjoyed it, I hope it was helpful, and I'd love to see your progress, so tag me on Instagram, talk about it in the comments, do whatever you need to do. I'd love to see it. Awesome. Well, thanks guys.